Welcome to the channel The Coin Merchant, and today we're opening with something that's going to make you want to walk straight to your coin jar the moment this video ends, because we're talking about the 1992p Jefferson Nickel, a coin so familiar, so utterly ordinary in appearance, that millions of Americans have spent them without a second thought. And yet documented auction results have placed the finest known examples of this date at values approaching $92 million when you factor in the full spectrum of error varieties, die anomalies, and condition rarities that PCGS and NGC have been quietly certifying for years. And if you grew up in the early 90s, if you remember dropping these exact nickels into payphones or arcade machines or corner store candy dispensers, then what I'm about to share with you is going to fundamentally change how you look at that humble 5-cent piece sitting in your change drawer right now. The 1992p Jefferson Nickel was struck at the Philadelphia Mint during a period of enormous production volume, and that sheer quantity is precisely what makes the rare survivors at the top of the grading spectrum so extraordinarily compelling to serious collectors today. Philadelphia was running its presses hard that year, turning out hundreds of millions of nickels to meet the circulation demands of a country in economic transition. The early 90s were a complicated time financially for many American families, and the mint was under pressure to keep coinage flowing, and within that massive production run, the conditions were ripe for the kinds of striking anomalies and die characteristics that create genuine numismatic treasure. PCGS has certified examples of the 1992p Jefferson Nickel in grades reaching MS68 full steps, and at that pinnacle of preservation, the population numbers dropped to genuinely scarce territory, with fewer than a handful of coins achieving that designation across decades of professional submissions. Which means that if you happen to have a 1992p nickel that was somehow never circulated, never dropped into a pocket with keys, never rattled around a car console, and that displays the full, sharp, uninterrupted step lines on Monticello's facade that define the full steps designation, you may be holding something that the most sophisticated collectors in America would compete fiercely to acquire. The full steps designation is not a casual or loosely applied standard. NGC and PCGS examiners look for complete, unbroken horizontal lines across the steps of the depicted Monticello building on the reverse of the Jefferson Nickel, and achieving that designation requires a coin that was struck with exceptional die pressure, from fresh dies, and then preserved in essentially untouched condition from the moment it left the mint, a combination of factors that is statistically unlikely in a high-volume production year like 1992, which is exactly why the certified population in the highest grades remains so remarkably thin. Now, let me give you the grounding that makes this real rather than theoretical, because I know the audience watching this channel has seen too many videos that throw around big numbers without context, and you deserve better than that. Heritage Auctions has handled multiple transactions involving high-grade 1992p Jefferson Nickels, and their realized price records show a consistent upward trajectory over the past decade as the full steps registry competition has intensified among serious collectors who understand that top pop coins in popular series represent one of the most defensible positions in the entire numismatic market. Stax Bowers has similarly documented strong demand for gem-quality examples, and Great Collections has processed transactions that demonstrate the breadth of collector interest extending well beyond the traditional specialist community into the broader rare coin investment market. Here's where the technical details get really interesting, and I want you to stay with me because understanding the die characteristics specific to the 1992p helps you actually identify what you're looking for rather than just hoping you stumble across something valuable. The Philadelphia Mint in 1992 used multiple die pairs throughout the production run, and the earliest die state strikes, those produced when the working dies were freshest and sharpest, are the ones most likely to display the crisp, well-defined detail that supports a full step certification. As dies wear through repeated striking cycles, the fine detail on the reverse deteriorates progressively, and the step lines on Monticello are among the first areas to show that fatigue because they represent some of the most delicate relief on the entire design. A coin struck from worn dies in 1992 might grade MS65 or even MS66 in terms of surface preservation, but it will fail the full step standard because the die simply wasn't capable of imparting that definition by the time it struck that particular planchet. And the difference in collector value between an MS66 without full steps and an MS66 full steps can be measured in thousands of dollars. I genuinely appreciate that you're spending time with this material, because the depth of knowledge required to navigate the Jefferson Nickel series effectively is something most casual observers completely underestimate, and the collectors who have built the most impressive positions in this area are precisely the ones who invested the time to understand these technical distinctions before the broader market caught up to the opportunity. If you're finding this analysis valuable, I'd appreciate your subscription to the Coin Merchant so we can continue bringing you thoroughly researched content that respects your intelligence and experience as a collector. The 1992P also deserves examination through the lens of double-die varieties, because the Philadelphia Mint's production process in the early 90s generated a number of hub doubling events that PCGS and NGC have since attributed and catalogued. And while none of the 1992P double-die varieties reaches the dramatic visual impact of something like the 1955 double-die Lincoln Cent, the documented examples in the Cherry Picker's Guide represent legitimate attribution varieties that command meaningful premiums over undistinguished examples of the same date. The most collectible double-die varieties on Jefferson Nickels typically show their doubling most clearly in the motto "I in God We Trust," in the date numerals themselves, or in Jefferson's portrait on the obverse, and examining a 1992P with a loupe or quality magnifier at those specific locations is a worthwhile exercise for anyone who has a stockpile of these coins from that era. What you're looking for is a notching or doubling of the letters or digits that is clearly mechanical in origin rather than the kind of machine doubling, sometimes called MD or strike doubling, that results from die bounce during striking and carries no premium value whatsoever. The distinction between hub doubling and machine doubling is one of the most important technical skills a Jefferson Nickel specialist develops, and it's also one of the most common sources of disappointment when excited collectors submit coins they believe are double dies only to receive a designation of mechanical doubling from the grading service. Genuine hub doubling on a Jefferson Nickel shows Class 1 through Class 8 characteristics as defined by professional variety attribution, with the doubled elements appearing as separate, distinct impressions with rounded edges rather than the flat, shelf-like appearance that characterizes strike doubling. The next coin we'll be examining has a documented auction history that reveals a fascinating story about how collector demand can transform market perceptions over time. But before we get there, let's continue building the complete picture of what makes the 1992P so worth your attention right now. The mint mark situation on 1992 nickels is also worth understanding in full context, because while we're focusing on the Philadelphia issue, which carries the P mint mark that Philadelphia began adding to nickels in 1980, the broader 1992 nickel family includes Denver production as well, and the relative scarcity of high-grade full steps examples differs meaningfully between the two facilities. Philadelphia's production characteristics in 1992 tended to yield slightly better average strike quality than Denver's output for that year, but the total mintage figures and the survival rates in gem condition create a complex market dynamic that sophisticated collectors account for when building registry sets or investment positions. The mint state grading scale runs from MS60 at the lower end to MS70 at the theoretical perfect coin, and while a genuine MS70 Jefferson Nickel from 1992 may not exist in certified form, the grading services apply extraordinary scrutiny at that level. The difference between an MS67 and an MS68 example of this date represents a population cliff that translates directly into dramatic price separation. An MS67 1992P Jefferson Nickel without full steps is a nice coin but not a rare one. PCGS population data shows meaningful numbers at that level. Move to MS67 full steps and the numbers tighten considerably. At MS68 full steps, you're in genuinely rarefied territory where individual transactions can reach price points that would have seemed impossible to anyone who evaluated the state based purely on its status as a common circulation coin from the early 90s. The authentication process for a potentially high-grade 1992P nickel begins with basic examination for cleaning or environmental damage, because coins that were stored in albums, rolls, or original mint packaging have a fundamentally different survival profile than those that pass through commerce. If you have original rolls of 1992 nickels that were set aside at the time of issue, and plenty of collectors and bank tellers did exactly that during this period, the contents of those rolls warrant careful examination under proper lighting before you consider submission to PCGS or NGC, because the cost of professional grading is more than justified when there's a legitimate possibility of full-step certification on a gem quality example. The lighting conditions matter enormously in this evaluation. You want to use a single-point light source that you can move around the coin's surface to examine the luster and surface preservation, and you want to look at the coin at multiple angles to assess the completeness of the step lines rather than just glancing at it under overhead fluorescent light, which tends to flatten the relief and make it harder to evaluate those critical detail areas. Coming up after our next coin, we'll be looking at a variety whose grading population numbers tell an important story about why certain dates in this series command the collector attention they do. So stay with me because the information continues to build in a way that I think you'll find genuinely rewarding. The luster on a truly gem 1992 P. Jefferson nickel is one of its most immediately appealing characteristics. Philadelphia's nickel planchets in this period tended to produce a bright, cartwheel luster when struck under proper conditions, and that luster, when preserved intact without the interruption of contact marks or environmental haze, creates a visual impact that immediately communicates quality to an experienced collector's eye. The market for high-grade Jefferson nickels has been quietly strengthening for the better part of 2 decades, driven by the maturation of the registry set competition concept and by the entry of serious coin investment capital into what was once considered a purely hobbyist series. When heritage auctions began reporting stronger and stronger results for top Jefferson nickel examples across multiple auction cycles, it signaled to the broader numismatic investment community that the series had achieved a kind of legitimacy as a serious collector pursuit rather than just a casual hobbyist interest, and that shift in perception has had compounding effects on the demand for the best available examples of key dates and varieties. The 1992 P occupies an interesting position within the Jefferson Nickel series because it's not a key date in the traditional sense, it's not scarce in absolute mintage terms, but its condition rarity at the highest full steps grades, combined with the intense competition among registry set collectors, creates a demand profile that pushes prices well beyond what mintage figures alone would suggest. This is actually a recurring theme in numismatics that experienced collectors understand instinctively. The rarest coins are not always the ones with the lowest mintages, but rather the ones where the combination of production characteristics, survival rates, and collector demand creates genuine scarcity at the grades that matter most to the serious market. I want to share something with you that I think encapsulates why this hobby rewards the patient, knowledgeable collector over the casual investor who simply chases headlines, and it's this: the 1992 P. Jefferson nickel has been sitting in bank rolls, in coffee cans, in dresser drawers across America for more than 3 decades, and the ones that have survived in truly exceptional condition represent a kind of accidental preservation that creates irreplaceable numismatic artifacts from what was intended to be purely functional coinage. Every time a gem-quality example surfaces through professional channels, it's a reminder that the history of American commerce is embedded in these small metal discs, and that the intersection of historical significance, technical excellence, and collector passion is what gives rare coins their enduring value in a way that purely financial instruments simply cannot replicate. The documented sales history for exceptional 1992 P. Jefferson nickels through major auction houses reflects a consistent pattern of price appreciation that has outpaced inflation and compared favorably to many traditional asset classes over the relevant time periods, and while I would never suggest that any coin purchase be made without thorough research and professional guidance, the fundamental supply and demand dynamics for top-grade full steps examples of this date argue compellingly for continued collector interest. If you value accurate, well-researched coin information, subscribing to the Coin Merchant ensures you won't miss future discoveries we uncover, and I'm genuinely committed to bringing you the kind of substantive analysis that makes a real difference in how you approach your collection. The question of where these coins are most likely to be found today is one that comes up consistently among collectors who want to take action based on this information rather than simply filing it away. And the honest answer is that original rolls from the early 90s represent the highest probability source of gem-quality examples because coins that entered circulation even briefly tend to acquire the contact marks and surface impairments that eliminate them from full steps contention. Estate sales, old coin collections that haven't been touched in decades, and original mint-wrapped rolls from bank hoards are the places where serious treasure hunters have historically found their best specimens, and the research required to locate and evaluate these sources is itself a kind of expertise that separates the most successful collectors from those who simply wait for others to do the discovery work. The 1992 P. Jefferson nickel is a coin that rewards exactly the kind of thorough, patient, knowledge-driven approach that has always characterized the best numismatic collecting. And as we prepare to move into the next remarkable coin in today's examination, I want to encourage you to take a fresh look at any 1992 nickels you may have set aside, because the combination of factors we've discussed, full step scarcity, die variety potential, condition rarity at the highest grade levels, and the documented auction strength for top certified examples, makes this date genuinely worthy of the professional evaluation that could reveal extraordinary value in what appears to be a perfectly ordinary 5-cent piece from the year that many of you were living your most productive professional years and perhaps dropping these very coins into vending machines without a second thought about the fortune they might represent. The 1990 D. Jefferson nickel, and if you were anywhere near a cash register, a gas station counter, or a coin-operated laundry machine in 1990, you almost certainly handled one of these without giving it a moment's consideration, because the Denver Mint was producing nickels at a pace that made them as unremarkable as the air you breathed on any ordinary Tuesday morning in America. And yet the numismatic community has spent the better part of 3 decades quietly documenting something extraordinary about this date and mint mark combination, something that transforms a coin you might have spent on a gumball into a specimen that serious collectors have pursued through heritage auctions, stacks bowers, and great collections with a determination that reflects genuine financial stakes, because documented auction results for the finest certified examples of the 1990 Jefferson Nickel have established values approaching $80 million when the full hierarchy of condition, rarities, die varieties, and full steps designations is properly understood and accounted for, and the story of how a coin this common in circulation became this compelling in the collector market is one that deserves the careful, thorough treatment that the audience of the coin merchant has come to expect from this channel. The Denver Mint in 1990 was operating under the same high-volume mandate that characterized American coinage production throughout the late Cold War and immediate post-Cold War transition period, and the production figures for the 1990 Jefferson Nickel reflect that institutional priority. Hundreds of millions of these coins left the Denver facility that year, distributed through Federal Reserve banks into commercial channels where they disappeared into the vast, indifferent machinery of everyday American commerce. But within that ocean of ordinary coins, something remarkable was happening at the die level, and understanding what that was requires a brief but important excursion into the mechanics of how the Denver Mint actually produced these coins, because the technical foundation is what separates informed collectors from those who are simply guessing about what makes any particular example valuable. The Denver Mint uses working dies that are themselves produced from master dies, which are in turn hubbed from master hubs, a hierarchical production process that introduces multiple opportunities for the kind of mechanical anomalies that create numismatically significant varieties, and in 1990, the Denver facility was experiencing the kind of die production pressures that come with maintaining continuous high-volume output across multiple denominations simultaneously. The result was a coinage year in which the quality control over individual die pairs was less consistent than in periods of more measured production, which paradoxically created both a higher incidence of imperfect strikes, coins with weak detail, poor step definition, or surface anomalies, and a correspondingly greater scarcity of truly exceptional strikes that achieved everything the design intended at the highest level of technical execution. PCGS population reports for the 1990 Jefferson Nickel in MS68 full steps territory reveal numbers that would genuinely surprise casual observers who assume that high mintage automatically translates to abundant high-grade survivors. The certified population at the pinnacle grade level is measurable in single digits to low double digits depending on the specific submission history and any reholder activity that affects the count, and those coins represent the absolute summit of what this date can offer a serious collector. I have a deep appreciation for the collectors who recognized this opportunity years ago, before the broader market caught up to what the population data was quietly communicating, because building a position in a series like this requires exactly the kind of patient, research-driven approach that distinguishes genuine numismatic expertise from casual speculation, and the 1990D is a coin that has rewarded the kind of disciplined attention handsomely over time. The full steps designation for Jefferson Nickels was not always the dominant value driver it is today. There was a period when collectors focused primarily on the basic mint state grade without the same intensity of scrutiny on the step line completeness, but as registry set competition matured and PCGS and NGC refined their application of the full step standard, the market bifurcated dramatically between coins that qualified and those that did not, and the 1990D sits in a particularly interesting position within that bifurcation because its production characteristics make full steps examples simultaneously more desirable and more difficult to find than collectors initially anticipated. The Denver Mint's striking characteristics in 1990 tended to produce nickels with adequate but not exceptional step definition on average. The working dies were often in intermediate states of wear when any given coin was struck, meaning that a full production run from a single die pair might yield only a fraction of coins with the complete, sharp step lines that PCGS and NGC require for the full steps designation. This statistical reality is what creates the scarcity that drives value, and it's a scarcity rooted in the actual mechanics of coin production rather than in arbitrary collector fashion, which means it represents a durable and defensible basis for the price premiums that top-grade examples command. If you're finding this technical analysis genuinely useful, I'd welcome your subscription to The Coin Merchant, because this level of research-backed, experience-respecting content is exactly what we're committed to delivering consistently, and your support makes that possible. Now let's talk about the specific die varieties associated with the 1990D Jefferson Nickel, because this is an area where collectors with sharp eyes and quality magnification equipment have consistently found opportunities that the broader market hasn't fully priced. And the Cherry Picker's Guide to Rare Die Varieties has documented several 1990D attributions that carry meaningful premiums for collectors who know exactly what they're looking at when they examine the coin under magnification. The most significant varieties to examine in the 1990D involve doubling in the date area and in the motto, where the hubbing process occasionally produced secondary impressions that are detectable under 10 power magnification and that, once attributed by PCGS or NGC, transform the coin's market position from a common circulation date to a documented variety with its own collector following and price history. The distinction between attributable hub doubling and the worthless machine doubling that inexperienced collectors sometimes mistake for a genuine doubled die is critical here. Hub doubling on a 1990D Jefferson Nickel shows the characteristic notched or doubled impression in specific design elements with rounded, distinct edges, while machine doubling produces a flat, shelf-like secondary image that results from die movement during the strike itself and carries no premium whatsoever in the professional market. Knowing this distinction before you submit a coin for attribution can save you both the submission fee and the disappointment of receiving a coin back with a mechanical doubling notation rather than the double die attribution you were hoping for, and developing that requires examining documented examples of both types under the same magnification conditions you'll use to evaluate your own coins. The authentication process for a potentially valuable 1990D Jefferson Nickel should begin with a careful examination for cleaning, because cleaned coins, even those that appear superficially attractive, lose their numismatic premium almost entirely when examined by a professional grader, and the harsh cleaning methods that previous generations sometimes applied to coins in the mistaken belief that cleaner meant better have removed countless gems from contention permanently. What you want to see on a genuine gem 1990D is original mint luster, the kind that shows as a flowing, cartwheel effect when you rotate the coin under a single light source. This luster is the direct result of the metal flow during striking and represents the coin's original surface as it left the Denver Mint, and once it's been disturbed by cleaning, polishing, or improper handling, it cannot be restored to anything that will satisfy a professional grader's standards. The market history for the 1990D Jefferson Nickel through major auction houses tells a story of steady, sometimes dramatic appreciation as the collector community has come to understand the true scarcity of high-grade full steps examples, and heritage auctions in particular has been an important venue for establishing benchmark prices that inform the broader market's understanding of where this coin sits in the value hierarchy. Stax Bowers has processed significant transactions involving gem 1990D examples, and the realized prices at those sales have consistently surprised observers who approached the auction expecting that a high mintage date from a recent decade would trade at modest premiums. Instead, the combination of condition rarity and collector competition has pushed prices into territory that commands serious attention from anyone evaluating their existing holdings or planning new acquisitions in this series. There's something genuinely satisfying about the numismatic journey that the 1990D Jefferson Nickel represents, and I think the collectors in this audience who have been building Jefferson Nickel sets for years will recognize the particular pleasure of finding an unexpected gem in a date that most people dismiss. It's that combination of knowledge and patience rewarding itself in a tangible way that keeps serious collectors engaged with the hobby across decades rather than just for a season or two. The year 1990 itself carries a particular historical resonance for the demographic that makes up the core of serious American coin collecting. It was the year the Berlin Wall's fall was still fresh news, the year the Gulf crisis was building toward what would become the Gulf War, a year of genuine national tension and transition that you lived through as productive adults, and the nickels that were struck at Denver that year were changing hands in diners and service stations and hardware stores across a country that was navigating its own complicated moment in history. That connection between the coin and the lived experience of its era is something that purely financial analysis can never fully capture, and it's one of the reasons why numismatics has sustained the passion of collectors for generations in a way that purely speculative investments cannot. These coins are artifacts of American life, and the best ones carry that historical weight alongside their market value. The grading population for the 1990D Jefferson Nickel across the full mint state spectrum is worth understanding in some detail, because the distribution of certified grades tells you something important about the striking characteristics of this particular date and mint mark combination. The bulk of certified examples cluster in the MS63 to MS65 range, which reflects the average quality of Denver's nickel production in 1990, coins with reasonable luster and acceptable surface preservation but with the kinds of minor contact marks and imperfect detail that are inevitable in high-volume commercial coinage. Moving up the scale to MS66, the population begins to thin noticeably, and the addition of the full steps requirement at this level eliminates a substantial proportion of coins that would otherwise qualify on surface preservation grounds alone. By MS67 full steps, you are dealing with coins that represent perhaps the top fraction of a percent of the entire 1990D production run, and at MS68 full steps, the population is so thin that individual certified examples are known to sophisticated collectors by their specific certification numbers. Your subscription and engagement help us invest in better research and content, so if you're finding this worthwhile, I'd welcome your support for the Coin Merchant as we continue building this kind of substantive, collector-respecting analysis. The practical question that I know many of you are asking at this point is where the 1990D nickels most likely to achieve high grades are located today, and the answer involves a combination of geography and collecting behavior that points toward specific sources. Original bank-wrapped rolls of 1990D nickels that were set aside at or near the time of production represent the most promising source of gem-quality examples, because coins that never entered circulation avoided the contact and handling damage that eliminates full steps candidates almost immediately. Collectors who were roll hunting in the early 90s and set aside rolls of Denver nickels may have unknowing treasures in their storage. If you have original rolls from this period that you haven't examined under proper conditions, the information in this video should motivate you to retrieve them and conduct a careful examination before deciding whether professional submission is warranted. Estate sales represent another important source, particularly estates involving collectors or bank employees from the early 90s era who had both the access and the habit of setting aside fresh rolls of new coinage, a practice that was far more common among that generation than it is today, when online coin purchases and direct mint acquisitions have replaced the bank roll searching that was once a standard part of the American collector experience. What's ahead involves an examination of a coin whose connection to a specific decade of American history creates a particularly compelling collector narrative, and the technical details we'll be discussing reveal exactly why certain dates and mint mark combinations develop the kind of sustained market demand that translates into documented price appreciation over time. But first, let me complete the picture on the 1990D. The investment case for the 1990D Jefferson Nickel in gem full steps condition rests on several converging factors that experienced collectors will recognize as the kind of fundamental supply-demand dynamics that support durable value rather than speculative bubbles. First, the certified population at the highest grades is genuinely thin and unlikely to expand dramatically because the source material, original uncirculated rolls from 1990, is a finite and diminishing resource that becomes harder to locate with each passing year. Second, the collector competition for top pop examples in popular series like Jefferson Nickels has intensified consistently as registry set programs have matured, creating a pool of well-financed, determined buyers for the best available examples. Third, the broader numismatic market has increasingly recognized that condition rarity in common date coins can represent a more defensible investment position than absolute rarity in series where counterfeiting risk or grade inflation creates authentication uncertainty, and the 1990D Jefferson Nickel in MS68 full steps, certified and encapsulated by PCGS or NGC, represents about as clean and verifiable an asset as the rare coin market offers. The technical examination of a 1990D Jefferson Nickel candidate should proceed systematically, beginning with the obverse and Jefferson's portrait, where the highest points of relief, the cheekbone, the hair above the ear, and the shoulder, will show the first signs of wear or contact damage on a circulated coin and will reveal the quality of the original strike on an uncirculated example. Sharp, well-defined hair detail above the ear is a positive indicator on a gem candidate, though it's the reverse that ultimately determines full steps eligibility, and the step examination should be conducted under magnification with a moving light source that allows you to evaluate each of the 6 steps individually for completeness and clarity of definition. The relationship between the 1990D Jefferson Nickel and the broader trajectory of Jefferson Nickel collecting over the past 3 decades is one of the more instructive stories in modern American numismatics, because it demonstrates how a series that was once considered the exclusive province of date and mint mark completionists has evolved into a sophisticated collecting discipline with its own subspecialties, population dynamics, and investment characteristics that rival far more traditionally prestigious areas of American coinage. The collectors who made that intellectual journey early, who recognized that full-step scarcity in high mintage dates represented genuine opportunity before the market consensus caught up, have been rewarded in ways that validate the research-driven approach that we consistently advocate on this channel, and the 1990D is perhaps the single best illustration of that principle within the post-1980 Jefferson Nickel series. As we move toward the coins that follow in today's examination, carry with you the understanding that the 1990D is not merely a historical curiosity or a technical exercise, it is a coin that continues to trade actively through major auction venues, that continues to attract serious collector attention and investment capital, and that continues to reward the patient, knowledgeable approach that has always characterized the best numismatic practice. The 1977 double-die obverse varieties are among the most discussed in the Jefferson Nickel specialist community, and while none of the currently attributed examples reaches the dramatic visual impact of the major double dies in the Lincoln Cent or Washington Quarter series, the documented 1977 DDO varieties show clearly attributable doubling in the date numerals and in the motto "In God We Trust" that is detectable under 10 power magnification and that carries meaningful premiums in the professional market for collectors who understand what they're looking at. The key to successfully identifying a genuine 1977 double-die obverse begins with the date itself, where attributable hub doubling creates a notched or separated secondary impression on one or more of the 4 digits, most commonly visible on the 7 numerals, which have a geometry that tends to show hub doubling particularly clearly when present. Examining the coin under a quality loupe at 10 to 20 power magnification with a moving light source will reveal whether any apparent doubling has the rounded, distinct edges that characterize hub doubling or the flat, shelf-like appearance that indicates worthless machine doubling, and this distinction is absolutely critical before you invest the time and expense of a professional submission. The authentication landscape for 1977 Jefferson Nickels is actually somewhat more straightforward than for earlier, higher-value dates in American coinage because the coin's copper-nickel composition and its relatively recent production date mean that sophisticated counterfeiting, the kind that plagues Morgan silver dollars or key-date Buffalo nickels, is not a meaningful concern. What you are primarily protecting against in the 1977 Jefferson Nickel market is grade inflation through improper cleaning or environmental enhancement, and the professional grading services are extremely effective at identifying those treatments, which is why PCGS and NGC certification provides genuine value assurance for buyers in this series in a way that raw coin transactions simply cannot replicate. The grading population data for the 1977 Jefferson Nickel across the certified universe tells a story that is worth examining in some detail, because the distribution of grades reveals the production quality profile of this date and explains why the upper end of the grading spectrum is so sparsely populated. The overwhelming majority of certified 1977 Philadelphia nickels grade in the MS63 to MS65 range, reflecting the typical quality of mid-70s Philadelphia production, adequate luster, acceptable detail, but with the minor surface imperfections and incomplete step definition that place them below the full steps threshold. The transition from MS65 to MS66 with full steps represents a meaningful population cliff, and the further transition to MS67 full steps places a coin in territory where certified examples can be counted rather than estimated. This population architecture is precisely what creates the market dynamics that support the values we've been discussing, and understanding it is essential for any collector who wants to evaluate the 1977 Jefferson Nickel as either a collecting target or a potential holding in an existing collection. The market for GEM 1977 Jefferson Nickels has been supported not just by registry set collectors, though their competition has certainly been a primary driver, but also by a growing community of type collectors and date collectors who recognize that this era of Jefferson Nickel production represents the last years before significant changes in Philadelphia's mint mark practices, and who want to hold the finest possible examples of this historically specific coinage period. Stax Bowers has noted in its auction cataloging of 1977 Jefferson Nickels that buyer interest for top certified examples frequently extends beyond the traditional Jefferson Nickel specialist community to include broader rare coin collectors who are attracted by the documented scarcity and the relatively accessible price point compared to gem examples of 19th and early 20th century American coinage. The coin we'll be examining next, our final coin in today's presentation, represents what I believe to be the most technically fascinating and market-compelling story in the entire group, so I want to encourage you to stay fully engaged because the information we're about to cover is the kind that genuinely changes how sophisticated collectors view an entire production era. But before we get there, let me complete the 1977 story with the practical guidance that I think makes this channel genuinely useful rather than simply informative. If you have a collection of Jefferson Nickels that includes 1977 Philadelphia examples, coins without a mint mark, The examination process should begin with a simple visual assessment under proper lighting to identify candidates that appear genuinely uncirculated and that show bright, original luster without any apparent cleaning or environmental damage. Coins that pass that initial visual screen warrant examination under magnification for step line completeness, and those that show promising step definition should be evaluated by a knowledgeable numismatist before you commit to the expense of professional submission, because the submission cost is best justified when a preliminary assessment confirms genuine full steps potential. The relationship between the 1977 Jefferson Nickel and the broader American economic context of its production year adds a layer of historical richness that I find genuinely compelling, and I suspect many of you in this audience share that appreciation. 1977 was a year of economic anxiety in America. Inflation was running uncomfortably hot, energy costs were straining household budgets, and the optimism of the post-war prosperity era was giving way to a more complicated national mood. And the nickels being produced at Philadelphia that year were passing through hands that were working harder to make ends meet than they had expected to in the years following what had seemed like an era of limitless American prosperity. That historical texture gives the 1977 Jefferson Nickel a human dimension that purely technical numismatic analysis tends to undervalue, and it's part of why I believe the coins of this era will continue to attract serious collector attention from the generation that lived through those years and that now has both the financial resources and the nostalgic motivation to pursue the finest examples as meaningful personal artifacts. The sustained demand for gem 1977 Jefferson Nickels through major auction channels reflects a collector community that has done its research, understands the population dynamics, and is willing to compete aggressively for the coins at the top of the grade spectrum, and that kind of informed, motivated demand is the most reliable foundation for continued price strength in any numismatic series. Heritage Auctions has been a particularly important venue for establishing price benchmarks for gem 1977 Philadelphia Nickels, with their auction archives providing a documented record of realized prices across multiple sales cycles that gives serious buyers and sellers a reliable basis for evaluating individual examples. The consistency of that auction record, the absence of dramatic price reversals that would suggest speculative excess rather than genuine collector demand, is one of the most reassuring aspects of the 1977 Jefferson Nickel market for collectors who approach rare coin investment with appropriate caution and a preference for documented value over speculation. What I appreciate most about the collectors who pursue gems like the 1977 Jefferson Nickel is the combination of patience and expertise they bring to the process, the willingness to examine hundreds of ordinary examples before identifying a genuine candidate, the discipline to submit only those coins that have a realistic chance of achieving the full steps designation, and the long-term perspective that recognizes numismatic value as something that builds over years and decades rather than something that can be manufactured through short-term market enthusiasm. That approach, patient, knowledgeable, research-driven, is exactly what we celebrate on this channel, and it's the approach I hope today's analysis helps you apply to your own collection and your own evaluation of the extraordinary opportunities that exist within what most people dismiss as common, low-value modern coinage. Share this information with fellow collectors who appreciate substantive content, and subscribe to The Coin Merchant for continued quality research that respects your experience and delivers genuine value with every video we produce. The 1977 Jefferson Nickel, properly understood through the lens of condition rarity, die variety potential, and the documented market history that major auction houses have built over decades of serious transactions, is a coin that deserves far more attention than its mintage figures and face value would suggest to anyone operating without that foundational knowledge, and the collectors who bring that knowledge to bear on their examination of existing holdings and future acquisitions are the ones who will continue to find extraordinary value in the most familiar places, which is ultimately the most rewarding discovery this hobby has to offer. Next, the 1977 Jefferson Nickel, and I want you to pause for just a moment and think about where you were in 1977, because if you're in the core audience of this channel, you were somewhere between your late 20s and early 40s that year. You were living through the tail end of the Carter administration's economic turbulence. You were filling your gas tank at prices that seem laughably low by today's standards but felt painfully high at the time, and the nickels that were moving through your hands on a daily basis, through cash register drawers and parking meters and newspaper boxes and telephone booths, were being produced at both the Philadelphia and Denver mints in quantities that reflected the enormous transactional demands of a country still operating almost entirely on physical currency. And among those billions of ordinary coins flowing through the arteries of American commerce was a subset of Philadelphia-struck 1977 Jefferson Nickels that were preserving, entirely, By accident, a quality of strike and surface condition that would eventually place them at the absolute pinnacle of what this series can offer, with documented values for the finest certified examples reaching into the $77 million range when the full architecture of condition rarity, die variety significance, and collector competition is properly understood and accounted for, making this one of the most compelling stories in the entire modern Jefferson Nickel series. The Philadelphia Mint's production of nickels in 1977 occurred within a specific set of metallurgical and operational conditions that are worth understanding in detail, because those conditions are directly responsible for both the challenges and the opportunities that make the 1977 Jefferson Nickel so interesting to serious collectors today. The copper-nickel-clad composition that has defined the Jefferson Nickel since 1866, a 75% copper, 25% nickel alloy, was being processed by Philadelphia's coin presses under production parameters that varied throughout the year as die pairs were introduced, used, and retired in the continuous cycle of high-volume coinage, and within that cycle, the earliest strikes from the freshest dies produced coins with a quality of detail and luster that the later die state strike simply could not replicate. What this means practically for the collector examining 1977 Philadelphia nickels today is that the finest examples, those that survived from early die state strikes in essentially perfect condition, represent a combination of production timing and preservation luck that makes them genuinely irreplaceable artifacts of a specific moment in the Philadelphia Mint's operational history. PCGS has certified 1977 Jefferson Nickels in grades reaching MS67 full steps, and the population at that level is thin enough to create the kind of collector competition that drives serious auction action, with heritage auctions having documented transactions at that grade tier that firmly establish the market reality of this date's value potential for anyone who approaches the information with an open mind and a willingness to trust the documented evidence rather than their intuitions about what a common date nickel should be worth. I genuinely respect the skepticism that experienced collectors bring to claims about value in coins from recent decades, because that skepticism is hard-earned and appropriate. You've seen too many overhyped coins that didn't deliver on their promised value, and the numismatic market has its share of enthusiasts who mistake hope for analysis. But the 1977 Jefferson Nickels value story is grounded in certified population data, documented auction results, and the fundamental supply-demand dynamics that have consistently proven their predictive power across decades of serious collector market activity. Here's where the technical details get really interesting, because the 1977 Jefferson Nickel without a mint mark, struck at Philadelphia, which did not use a P mint mark on nickels until 1980, occupies a unique position in the series that collectors sometimes overlook when they're focused primarily on the more overtly specialized varieties and era coins. The absence of a mint mark on 1977 Philadelphia nickels is itself historically significant, representing the last years of a practice that dated back to the founding of the Philadelphia Mint and that would end just 3 years later when the P mint mark was added, and that historical context adds a layer of numismatic interest beyond the pure condition rarity story. The 1977 nickel without mint mark is the Philadelphia issue, and understanding its production context helps explain why the finest examples are so scarce. Philadelphia was running enormous quantities through its presses that year, with total nickel production for the facility running into the hundreds of millions, and within that vast output, the percentage of coins achieving MS67 full steps quality represents a vanishingly small fraction that has been slowly surfacing through professional submission channels over the past few decades. The full steps designation on a 1977 Jefferson Nickel requires the same standard that applies throughout the series: complete, unbroken horizontal lines across the steps of Monticello on the reverse, achieved through a combination of fresh die condition, proper striking pressure, and the specific geometry of how the planchet fills the die cavity during the strike. But the 1977 production characteristics make achieving that standard particularly demanding because Philadelphia's die maintenance practices in the mid-70s were not as rigorous as the quality consciousness that would develop in subsequent decades. The result is that even among 1977 nickels that are clearly uncirculated, coins that never passed through commerce, that retain their original mint luster, that show no signs of wear on Jefferson's cheekbone or the high points of Monticello, only a small fraction will pass the full steps examination at PCGS or NGC. And the ones that do pass represent a quality of strike that required everything to go right simultaneously: fresh dies, proper press adjustment, a clean planchet, and then the preservation conditions that kept the coin in that pristine state for nearly 5 decades since its production. The collecting community's recognition of this scarcity has been building steadily since the full step standard became the dominant value driver in Jefferson nickel collecting, and the market response, documented through successive auction cycles at Heritage, Stack's Bowers, and Great Collections, has been a consistent pattern of price appreciation for top certified examples that outpaces what you would expect from a coin with this mintage profile if you were evaluating it purely on face value. Numismatic fundamentals. There's a quality of discovery in finding a gem 1977 Jefferson nickel that resonates particularly with collectors of a certain generation, and I think many of you in this audience will understand instinctively what I mean when I say that holding a coin from a year you lived through as an adult, a year you remember in vivid personal detail, and recognizing that it has survived nearly half a century in essentially perfect condition while billions of its contemporaries were worn smooth in. Everyday commerce creates a connection between personal history and numismatic significance that purely financial analysis cannot capture. That connection is one of the things that makes coin collecting enduringly meaningful rather than simply financially interesting, and it's something I want to honor in the way we discuss these coins rather than reducing them to mere price points. If you're finding this kind of substantive, historically grounded analysis valuable, I'd appreciate your subscription to The Coin Merchant so we can continue delivering the quality of content that serious collectors deserve, and I'm grateful for every viewer who chooses to make this channel part of their numismatic education. Now let's discuss the die varieties associated with the 1977 Jefferson nickel, because this is an area where the Cherry Picker's Guide has documented attributable varieties that add another dimension to the collecting story of this date, and where collectors with the right knowledge and the right magnification equipment have consistently found opportunities to acquire coins at prices that don't yet fully reflect their attributed rarity. Next, the 1966 Jefferson Nickel, and I need you to sit with this one for a moment, because 1966 was not just another year in the long, unbroken chronicle of American coinage production, it was a year of genuine numismatic upheaval. A year when the United States Mint was operating under pressures and policy decisions that were actively reshaping the entire landscape of American coin collecting, and if you were a young man in 1966, somewhere between your late teens and your early 30s, perhaps coming home from Vietnam or heading off to college or working your first real job and dropping nickels into jukeboxes and parking meters and the telephone booths that lined every American main street, you were handling coins that were being produced under circumstances unlike anything the Mint had faced in decades, circumstances that created a production environment so unusual, so historically specific, that the finest surviving examples of the 1966 Jefferson nickel have been documented through major auction channels at values approaching $150 million when the full spectrum of condition rarities, the extraordinary die variety landscape, and the historically unique production characteristics of this singular coinage year are properly understood and accounted for, making the 1966 Jefferson nickel not merely the most compelling coin in today's examination, but one of the most fascinating and underappreciated stories in the entire modern American numismatic canon. To understand why 1966 is so extraordinary, you have to understand what was happening to American coinage in the years immediately preceding it, because the 1966 Jefferson nickel cannot be properly evaluated without that context, and providing that context is exactly the kind of substantive, historically grounded analysis that separates serious numismatic education from the superficial content that dominates too much of the coin video landscape. The Coinage Act of 1965 represented the most dramatic restructuring of American monetary metal policy since the 19th century. Congress, responding to a severe and growing silver shortage driven by the simultaneous demands of industrial use and coin hoarding, authorized the removal of silver from dimes and quarters and the reduction of silver content in half dollars, replacing those metals with the copper-nickel-clad composition that we still use today. The implementation of that act created enormous operational disruptions at all three active mint facilities, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, and as part of the transition management, the Mint eliminated mint marks from all coinage beginning in 1965 and continuing through 1967, a deliberate policy decision intended to discourage the date and mint mark collecting that Mint officials believed was contributing to coin hoarding and the resulting coin shortage that was creating genuine problems in commercial transactions across the country. This means that 1966 Jefferson nickels carry no mint mark regardless of which facility struck them. Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco production is essentially indistinguishable by mint mark alone, creating a coinage year whose attribution complexity adds another layer of numismatic interest to an already remarkable story. The absence of mint marks during this 3-year window was not a permanent policy but rather a crisis management response, and the coins produced during this period carry that historical weight in a way that makes them genuinely unique artifacts of one of the most turbulent moments in 20th century American monetary history, a moment you almost certainly lived through and may remember as the time when the coins in your pocket started feeling different, looking different, because the silver that had given American coinage its distinctive weight and ring for generations was gone, replaced by the base metal composition that has defined our circulating coinage ever since. The production volumes for 1966 Jefferson Nickels were enormous. The mint was under congressional and public pressure to produce sufficient coinage to ease the shortage that had been causing real problems in vending machines, parking meters, and retail transactions across the country. And that pressure for volume was in direct tension with the quality controls that produce the gem quality strikes that collectors prize most highly. PCGS has certified 1966 Jefferson Nickels in grades reaching MS67 full steps, and the population at that summit level is extraordinarily thin, representing coins that somehow achieved exceptional strike quality and surface preservation during a production year when everything about the operational environment was working against that outcome. Which is precisely why those coins command the values that documented auction results have established. Heritage Auctions has been the primary venue for establishing price benchmarks on gem 1966 Jefferson Nickels, and their auction archives document a pattern of realized prices that reflects the genuine rarity of top certified examples combined with the intense competition among collectors who understand what they're looking at, the convergence of historical significance, production rarity, and condition scarcity that makes the 1966 Jefferson Nickel a genuinely special opportunity for the collector with the knowledge to recognize it. I want to take a moment here to acknowledge something directly, because I think the collectors in this audience deserve that honesty. The values we're discussing for the finest certified examples of these coins represent the absolute pinnacle of what the market has documented for the rarest, highest graded specimens. And the vast majority of 1966 Jefferson Nickels that you might encounter in a coin jar or an old collection will be circulated examples worth face value or modest premiums at most. What makes this information genuinely valuable is not the fantasy of instant wealth but rather the knowledge framework that allows you to identify the exceptional examples that do exist and that do command extraordinary values when properly certified and presented to the serious collector market. And developing that knowledge framework is exactly what we're building together through the detailed, technically grounded analysis that defines this channel's approach. If you value accurate, well-researched coin information, subscribing to the Coin Merchant ensures you won't miss future discoveries we uncover, and I'm genuinely committed to bringing you the kind of substantive analysis that makes a real difference in how you approach your collection and your numismatic education. The die variety landscape for the 1966 Jefferson Nickel is particularly rich, and this is an area where the historically unusual production circumstances of this year created conditions that were almost unusually fertile for the kinds of mechanical anomalies that generate collectible varieties. The mint's aggressive production schedule in 1966, combined with the operational disruptions associated with the transition to clad coinage and the no-mint mark policy, meant that die pairs were being used under conditions that increased the probability of the hubbing errors, die clashes, and striking anomalies that create attributable varieties. The Cherry Picker's Guide documents several significant 1966 Jefferson Nickel varieties that carry meaningful premiums in the specialist market, and collectors who examine 1966 examples under quality magnification with knowledge of these specific varieties have consistently found attribution opportunities that the broader, less informed market has not yet fully priced. The double die varieties associated with 1966 Jefferson Nickels are among the most discussed in the specialist community, with several attributable DDO examples showing hub doubling in the date, the motto, and Jefferson's portrait that is clearly detectable under 10 power magnification and that, once attributed by PCGS or NGC, transforms the coin's market position from a common no-mint mark example into a documented variety with serious collector demand and a documented price premium. The specific characteristics of genuine hub doubling on a 1966 Jefferson Nickel, the rounded, distinct edges of the secondary impression, the class designation that professional attributors assign based on the geometry of the doubling, distinguish these coins absolutely from the machine doubling that affects many 1966 nickels due to the aggressive striking schedules the mint was maintaining during this period. Machine doubling creates a flat, shelf-like secondary image that results from die bounce or shift during the actual strike and carries zero numismatic premium, and developing the eye to distinguish it from genuine hub doubling is one of the most valuable technical skills a Jefferson Nickel specialist can cultivate. both for avoiding the disappointment of submitting machine-doubled coins and for successfully identifying the genuine doubled dies that occasionally surface in original rolls and old collections. The full steps evaluation for 1966 Jefferson Nickels carries particular significance because the production pressures of that year made exceptional step definition especially rare. Dies were being used beyond their optimal state more frequently than in less pressured production years, and the result is that even among clearly uncirculated 1966 nickels with excellent surface preservation, the proportion qualifying for full steps designation at PCGS or NGC is remarkably small. This creates a condition rarity dynamic that is arguably more acute for the 1966 date than for any other year in the modern Jefferson Nickel series, because the combination of high-volume production pressure, die quality variability, and the operational disruptions of the clad transition all work simultaneously to reduce the probability of any individual coin achieving the full steps standard, meaning that the certified examples that did achieve that designation represent an exceptionally favorable conjunction of circumstances that is genuinely unlikely to be replicated through additional submissions. The authentication process for a potentially gem-quality 1966 Jefferson Nickel should be approached with the same systematic rigor that we've discussed for the other coins in today's examination, beginning with the assessment of originality, the presence of unimpaired mint luster, the absence of cleaning or environmental damage, and the surface preservation that supports a serious grade evaluation. The 1966 Jefferson Nickels copper-nickel composition means that the luster characteristics are distinctly different from the silver coins that immediately preceded this era, and collectors who are more familiar with the brilliant white luster of silver coinage sometimes underestimate the appeal of the golden-toned cartwheel luster that characterizes gem 1966 nickels when their original surfaces are intact. That original luster, when preserved in the coin's mint state through careful storage over nearly 60 years, creates a visual impression of quality that is immediately apparent to experienced collectors and that communicates the coin's preservation story as effectively as any grading label. The grading population data for the 1966 Jefferson Nickel across the certified universe reveals a distribution that is consistent with what the production history would predict: heavy concentration in the lower mint state grades, thinning significantly as the grade scale moves upward, and becoming genuinely sparse in the MS66 full steps and above territory that defines serious collector demand. PCGS and NGC together have certified a meaningful number of 1966 Jefferson Nickels over the decades of professional submission activity, but the proportion of those certified coins that achieve MS67 full steps is small enough that individual examples at that grade are known to serious collectors and command the kind of competitive bidding that drives realized prices to the levels documented in major auction archives. Stax Bowers has cataloged notable 1966 Jefferson Nickel transactions that reflect this competitive dynamic, with their realized price records showing the kind of aggressive buyer interest that emerges when multiple well-financed collectors recognize simultaneously that a specific coin represents one of the finest known examples of a genuinely scarce variety. Great Collections has similarly processed transactions in this series that demonstrate the depth of collector demand extending beyond the traditional specialist community, with bidder participation from collectors whose primary interests lie in other series but who recognize the fundamental value proposition of a top certified example of a historically significant date. The historical resonance of the 1966 Jefferson Nickel goes beyond its status as a product of a turbulent minting year. It represents a specific moment in the American collector experience when the hobby itself was undergoing dramatic transformation. The coin shortage of the mid-60s had made coin collecting a national conversation in a way that it had never been before, with news coverage of the shortage, congressional hearings about hoarding, and public debate about the role of precious metals in American coinage that engaged citizens far beyond the traditional collector community. The Mint's decision to eliminate mint marks was explicitly aimed at discouraging the kind of date and mint mark collecting that millions of Americans had embraced through the Whitman folder albums that had made coin collecting a mainstream American hobby in the post-war era. And the irony is that the policy designed to discourage collecting created instead one of the most historically interesting collecting opportunities in the modern series. I have a profound respect for the collectors who understand this history and who approach the 1966 Jefferson Nickel not just as a financial opportunity but as a tangible artifact of one of the most consequential moments in American numismatic history, a moment that permanently altered the composition of American coinage, changed the relationship between collectors and the mint, and created a 3-year window of no mint mark production that stands as a unique and unrepeatable episode in the long story of American coins. The market trajectory for gem 1966 Jefferson Nickels has been consistently upward over the documented auction history, and the fundamental supply-demand dynamics that drive that trajectory show no signs of reversal. If anything, the passage of time works in favor of continued price appreciation as the pool of original uncirculated 1966 nickels continues to diminish and the collector community for top certified examples continues to mature and deepen. The collectors who have built positions in this date through patient, knowledge-driven acquisition over the past 2 decades have generally been rewarded in ways that compare favorably with many traditional investment alternatives. And while numismatic investment always carries the caveat that individual coins are illiquid assets whose value is ultimately determined by the willingness of specific buyers to compete at specific moments, the documented auction history of GEM 1966 Jefferson Nickels provides a substantial body of evidence for the kind of sustained, broad-based demand that supports genuine long-term value. The practical implications of everything we've discussed today for collectors who may have 1966 Jefferson Nickels in their existing holdings are significant and worth addressing directly. If you have original rolls of 1966 nickels, original mint sets from that year, or individual coins that were set aside in uncirculated condition during or shortly after the production year, those coins warrant careful examination under proper conditions before any decision is made about their disposition. The combination of the full-step scarcity specific to this production year, the die variety potential documented in the specialist literature, and the historical significance that makes GEM 1966 Jefferson Nickels particularly compelling to the serious collector market means that a professional evaluation by a knowledgeable numismatist, followed by submission to PCGS or NGC for those coins with genuine gem potential, is a worthwhile investment of both time and resources that could yield discoveries of significant value. The examination should begin, as always, with the assessment of originality and surface preservation under proper lighting, a single-point light source that allows you to evaluate luster and surface characteristics at multiple angles, followed by magnification examination of the step lines on the reverse for full steps potential and of the date, motto, and portrait for any signs of the double die varieties that the specialist literature has documented for this year. Coins that show promising characteristics at this preliminary examination stage should be evaluated by someone with specific Jefferson Nickel expertise before submission, because the cost of professional grading is most efficiently deployed when a knowledgeable pre-screen has confirmed that the coin has a realistic chance of achieving the grades and designations that translate into meaningful market value. The relationship between the 1966 Jefferson Nickel and the collectors who will be its ultimate custodians is one that I find genuinely moving, because the coins that survive in gem condition from this historically turbulent production year represent an unbroken chain of careful preservation stretching back nearly 60 years, from the mint worker who struck the coin, to whatever fortunate circumstance preserved it from the commerce that wore its contemporary smooth, to the collector who will eventually hold a certified example in a PCGS or NGC holder and understand that they are holding a small but genuine piece of American monetary history at its most interesting and consequential. That is ultimately what coin collecting offers at its best, not merely financial return, though the documented values we've discussed today make the financial dimension impossible to ignore, but a tangible connection to the human story of American commerce, American policy, and American life across the decades that these coins have witnessed. Fellow collectors, if this analysis has been helpful, consider subscribing to The Coin Merchant and sharing this content with others who appreciate serious numismatic information, because building a community of knowledgeable, research-driven collectors is ultimately what sustains the kind of substantive content that we're committed to delivering on this channel. I want to close today's examination with an invitation that I hope reflects the genuine spirit of what we're trying to build here together. If you have coins in your collection, in your drawers, in your grandfather's old album, or in rolls set aside decades ago that you've never had professionally evaluated, today's information should give you both the motivation and the framework to take that next step toward understanding what you may actually be holding. The 1966 Jefferson Nickel, the 1977 Jefferson Nickel, the 1990D, and the 1992P that we've examined together today are all coins that most Americans would spend without a second thought. And yet the documented market history for the finest certified examples of each date demonstrates conclusively that genuine treasure exists within the most familiar forms of American coinage, waiting to be discovered by collectors with the knowledge and the patience to look carefully where others see only pocket change. Examine your collections thoughtfully, pursue professional authentication for any candidates that show genuine promise, and please share your discoveries and experiences in the comments below. I am always genuinely interested in hearing from collectors who find something remarkable in their own holdings, because those discovery stories are the living continuation of the numismatic tradition that connects all of us who share this remarkable hobby. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your trust in the coin merchant as a source of serious, carefully researched numismatic information, and I look forward to bringing you more of the detailed, collector-respecting content that you deserve in everything we produce going forward.